Today's episode describes how the Genocidal Government, through Colonel Bagosora, disregarded the UN Security Council's embargo and managed to smuggle weapons purchased in Seychelles through a third-party arms dealer and transported to Rwanda through Goma. 14th June 1994 marked a major victory in the RPF liberation struggle when they managed to liberate Gitarama after 2 weeks of heavy fighting. The former Gitarama district had long been characterized by divisionism and discrimination against Tutsis and was the starting point of the massacres and acts of violence against Tutsis beginning in November of 1959. Elsewhere, when the RPF Inkotanyi rescued surviving Tutsis on the night of 16th June at Centre National de Pastorale St. Paul in Kigali, killers responded by launching another major attack on the morning of 17th June 1994 at the nearby St. Famille Parish. June 13th, 1994. The reporter Daniel Mermet launched a daily depiction of the genocide he witnessed in Nyarubuye. Bagosora arrived in Rwanda with arms to destroy Tutsis. In the areas controlled by the RPF Inkotanyi, journalists and staff from international non-government organizations were able to go with the troops and carry on with their work in those areas as they wanted. Some of them were surprised by the gravity of the genocide against the Tutsi, and they wrote articles or prepared radio reports that highlighted the tragic history of the genocide and the violence that took place. Daniel Mermet is one of those who demonstrated the truth. In the midst of the genocide, the criminal government received weapons purchased by Colonel Bagosora from Seychelles, brought by a Congolese military plane. Daniel Mermet is a French journalist who worked for one of the France's leading radio stations, France Inter. On May 27, 1994, Daniel Mermet arrived in Nyarubuye with his colleague Jérôme Bastion, who worked for Radio France International, RFI. Arriving at Nyarubuye Catholic Parish, they were shocked by the inscrutable massacres that had taken place. They found some bodies of the Tutsis who had been killed still bleeding. Some of these bodies had been torn into pieces while others were being eaten by dogs. They were shocked to learn that there were some who had survived in Nyarubuye massacres. A 13-year-old girl named Valentine. The two journalists interviewed Valentine with the help of a translator, Gaspard Ngarambe, who had also survived the massacres of Nyarubuye. The latter was a student at Grand Séminaire de Nyakivanda Major Seminary at the time, and the genocide had begun while he was on holidays in Nyarubuye. Valentine's voice contributed to a long broadcast which made the history of the genocide against the Tutsi widely known. From 13th June 1994 to 22nd June 1994, Daniel Mermet in his talk show named Là-bas si je suis, that ran daily on France Inter between 3 p.m. and 5 p.m., he talked about the history of the genocide and relayed to his audience Valentine's testimony. This testimony touched many hearts and helped bring about historical clarity on the cruelty of the killings of the Tutsi. Daniel Mermet also had the opportunity to give a historical account of how the genocide was planned and carried out. At that time in France, many were still unaware of the facts, and genocide deniers had started their campaign to distort the truth. It was not easy to relay such information on Radio France Internationale since it was French government-sponsored radio station, and the opinion that the French government had at the time was not to portray the interim government as a genocidal regime together with its armed forces. There was a testimony by Philippe Boisserie, who worked for France 2 government television, in an article published on August 1995 issue of Le Temps Moderne, explaining the instruction by the French government to French television, radio station, and state-owned newspapers to hide the truth about the genocide against the Tutsi. Philippe Boisserie explained that on 10th April 1994, he was sent to Rwanda with French troops in an operation called Amaryllis, instructed to never publish information about the killings, that his only concern was with the French army and about how foreigners in Rwanda were being evacuated by foreign planes that had come to transport them. He wrote in the following words, "Why did they send me to Rwanda? The instructions given by my administration were very clear. I was only sent to oversee the evacuation of foreigners, especially the French. Evacuation of French was the objective. Rwandans were not cared for, and this hurt me." One of my leaders in the media services, already known for his clarity, told me the following: You are going to monitor the information regarding the repatriation of foreigners living in Rwanda and come back once it's completed. We are not sending you to monitor and publish information related to black killings between themselves. In any case, no one cares about those killings. Daniel Mermet refused to comply with the directives because of what he had witnessed in Nyarubuye and his humanity after hearing how Valentine and fellow survivors of the Nyarubuye killings had survived, as well as the inscrutable atrocities committed against them. He listened to the testimonies of survivors that he had found in Nyarubuye and decided to return later to Rwanda several times and publish stories about what he had witnessed. His courage helped many grasp the weight of what was happening in Rwanda because most French citizens had heard that it was just another inter-ethnic war. As we speak of the courage of Daniel Mermet, we also think of the fellow journalist who had shown the truth about the genocide as it was, especially in France, even though it was not easy. We can mention Laure de Villepin, France Culture, Patrick de Saint-Exupéry, Le Figaro, Monique Mas, RFI, Maria Malagardi, and Agnès Rotivel, La Croix, Jean Chotet, L'Humanité, Jean-Philippe Sépi, Libération, Jean-François de Pequière, L'événement du jeudi, Laurent Bijard, Les Nouvelles Observateurs, Vincent Hugo, L'Express, Alain Filet, Libération, Madeleine Mukamamano, and Théogène Karabayinga from RFI, etc. In Belgium, Marie-France Cross, La Libre Belgique, Colette Breckman, Le Soir, Jean-Pierre Martin, RTL TVI also did a great job revealing the true nature of the genocide against the Tutsi. We also have to denounce those journalists who betray the standards of their profession by distorting the truth about the history of the genocide against the Tutsi, like Stéphane Smith, Le Monde, Pierre Payan, Marianne, Peter Verlinden, VRT, Father Guy Théonis, Dialogue, all of whom have opted for the negationist lines. Due to the fact that Kambanda's government was carrying out the genocide, the United Nations Council had adopted a resolution 927 of 17th May 1994 calling for an embargo restricting all countries neither to give weapons to Rwanda nor to allow Rwanda to buy weapons. Some countries did not comply with the resolution. Kambanda's government used different tactics to evade the UN resolution in order to continue to buy weapons and ammunition with an aim of carrying out the genocide. It was in this context that Colonel Bagosora disguised himself into a senior officer in the Zairian army and went to Seychelles to buy weapons. He did this with the help from South African businessman Petrus William Ayler, who was in charge of the arms trade. Kambanda's government entered into an agreement with the businessman, and the money to buy the weapons was paid through him. Colonel Bagosora and Ayler arrived in Seychelles on the 4th of June 1994 and began negotiations with the aim to buy 80 tons of weapons in the name of the Minister of Defense of Zaire with the company. The weapons were purchased and reached Goma on June 13, 1994, brought by Zairian military planes. The plane went for a second time on the 17th of June 1994 and for a third time on the 19th of June 1994. The flight certificate allowing Zairian military plane to go to the Seychelles to bring the weapons was signed by the General Baoko Yoka, who was a vice minister in the Zairian Ministry of Defense. All the weapons were delivered to Goma Airport, unloaded and sent to Rwanda. Lieutenant Colonel Anatole Nsengiyumva, who was the commander of the army in Gisenyi, sent government soldiers and Interahamwe militia to unload the plane and park the vehicles that brought them to Rwanda. The weapons were handed over to the Interahamwe militia and soldiers of Kambanda's government. An investigation into the purchase of the weapons revealed that Ayler was paid by the Central Bank of Rwanda, which transferred the money to Ayler's account number 82113 Chita of Ayler in Switzerland at UBC, Union Bancaire Privée in the city of Lugano. The money was paid as follows. On June 14, 1994, Ayler was paid $592,784 from an account of the Central Bank of Rwanda located at the Bank of France in Paris called the Banque Nationale de Paris, BNP. On June 15, 1994, Ayler was paid $180,000 and the money was provided by the Central Bank of Rwanda. On June 16, 1994, Ehlers was paid $734,099 from a Central Bank of Rwanda account at BNP in Paris. On June 17, 1994, Ehlers was paid $150,000 by the Central Bank of Rwanda, the same as of June 15, 1994. The issue regarding the purchase and reception of these weapons was discussed at the Kambanda's government meeting held on 9th and 17th June 1994. Colonel Bagosora, in his trial at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda on 9th and 10th November 2005, admitted that he went to Seychelles to buy the weapons, which were brought to Goma on 14th and 16th June 1994 and then brought to Rwanda. He could not deny it, because the court was asking him based on a document in their possession that he had signed, which clearly showed that he was the one who bought them. On July 3, 1994, Prime Minister Jean Kambanda also admitted to the purchase of weapons in an interview with the French journalist Franck Johans, a writer in the French newspaper called Le Journal de Dimanche, as follows: "We are receiving weapons. That is clear. Without it, we wouldn't have been able to hold on. I am starting to understand how we can win this war. The embargo problem is no longer the same as it was a month ago." Following the liberation of Kabgayi concentration camp on June 2, 1994, the RPF Inkotanyi forces continued to exert pressure on the criminal government's army in various parts of the country, including the city of Kigali and Gitarama prefectures. In Kigali city, RPF Inkotanyi forces continued to rescue people in the Nyamirambo area and other parts of the city. June 14, 1994 was marked by a major victory, the liberation of Gitarama city after 2 weeks of heavy fighting. Gitarama prefecture is at the forefront of prefectures, which are home to leaders who have been instrumental in spreading divisionism and hatred among Rwandans that led to the genocide against the Tutsi. Parmehutu Party, which was based on policies of divisionism and discrimination, was founded in Gitarama. In addition, the massacres of Tutsis and other atrocities in 1959 started in Gitarama prefecture and spread quickly in other parts of the country. It was in the former Gitarama prefecture that the massacres and acts of violence against Tutsis started on November 3, 1959 in the former Ndiza chiefdom and spread across other chiefdoms. The Hutu and Tutsi populations of Rukoma and Mayaga chiefdoms supported the kingdom and opposed the attacks of the Parpehutu and Aprosoma militants, and it required Colonel Gilogist, who is the Congolese army known as Kamina, to fight and disperse them. Massacres of Tutsis, the expulsion, and the burning of their houses was more intense during the Kamarampaka elections in September 1961 and in the following years. Killings, persecution, and exterminating Tutsis was one of the hallmarks of President Kayibanda Gregoire's regime. During his ruling, Tutsis were killed at various times, in December 1963 and in February and March 1973. After Major General Habyarimana Juvenal overthrew President Kayibanda Gregoire on July 5, 1973, Tutsis from the former Gitarama prefecture had a short period of temporal tranquility. The refugees started to return to their properties, but it did not last because Habyarimana also put in place several obstacles for Tutsis who wanted to return to their motherland. He put conditions on the Tutsis who are still inside the country and denied them the right to visit and be visited by their relatives who had fled the country. He sustained the discrimination and divisionist political lines where Tutsis continued to be marginalized in all domains. In October 1990, when the RPF Inkotanyi launched the liberation struggle, as was the cases in the other parts of the country, Tutsis in Gitarama were arrested and imprisoned as accomplices of Inkotanyi and continued to be persecuted. Subsequently, President Habyarimana's government approved the formation of a multi-party system in June 1991. Politicians from Gitarama prefecture joined the MDR party as they felt that their old party had returned and that they had the opportunity to face the regime of President Habyarimana, which was involved in the imprisonment and assassination of politicians from Gitarama who had been President Kayibanda's close collaborators. It is in this regard that the MDR supporters attacked the ruling MRND party supporters, ordering them to become members of the MDR. Local leaders from MRND party were forced to join the MDR in the so-called Kubohoza, literally translated as to liberate. After realizing that the people of Gitarama prefecture were passionately opposed to the MRND party, President Habyarimana Juvenal used some of the most powerful leaders from Gitarama to divide MDR party in order to weaken his opposition. The MDR party was split in late October 1993, creating MDR Power or MDR Power. Those that President Habyarimana used to divide the MDR party included Karamira Fodouar, who was MDR's vice president, Mamo Esidras, who was the burgomaster of Masango commune since the Kaibanda presidency till 1992 and was on the MRND committee at the national level. Others who played a big role include Calix Nzabonimana, the former Minister of Planning and Minister of Youth and Organizations, Georges Rutaganda, son to Mamo Esidras, and former first vice president of Interahamwe at the national level, Ruhumuriza Phineas, who was on the Interahamwe committee at the national level, and others. Since the formation of the so-called Hutu power political parties in October 1993, tension between MDR and MRND militants stalled. Authorities started to convince the public that the enemy they had was a Tutsi whom they must fight and kill. Meetings inciting hatred and killings of Tutsis increased and were being held on all communes that made up Gitarama prefecture. The formation of militia groups and the supply of firearms to the population had been underway since the end of 1993, although there were some residents of some communes who had been undergoing training at Gako in Bugesera since 1992. Among the well-known militia groups were Bataillon Ndiza, which was undergoing training at the top of Ndiza Hill in Nyakawanda commune, the GP militia, which was undergoing the training in Rwanda at Kamana Clever's place, and the Interahamwe militia. The genocide was implemented in Gitarama communes after the meeting of April 18, 1994, which brought together members of Kambanda's government and leaders from various local and central level, including the burgomaster of all communes of Gitarama prefecture. The meeting was held in Murambi, Nyamabuye commune. However, there were some communes that had started the killings of Tutsis since April 9, 1994, namely Nyabikenje commune, the birthplace of Nzabonimana Calixte, who was the Minister of Youth and Organizations, Kigoma commune, ruled by Burgomaster Ugirashebuje Celestin, Ntongwe commune, ruled by Kagabo Charles, and others. Many Tutsis from the former Gitarama prefecture had fled to Kabgayi, thinking that they would be safe there. It turned out that they were mistaken because members of the security committee of Gitarama prefecture and burgomestres were coming with a list of Tutsis to be killed, putting them on buses and taking them to Ngororero to be executed. Starting from April 20th, 1994, buses were coming daily and taking Tutsis to Chome on the riverbanks of Nyabarongo in the former Chibirira and Satinsi communes. Other Tutsis were being killed in various forests near Kabgayi. Tutsis from Ntongwe and Mugina communes were killed by Interahamwe militia and government soldiers from Gako military base together with Burundian refugees. They were killed in extremely cruel conditions as Burundian refugees took out their hearts, grilled and ate them. Such brutal killings took place in various other places like Nyarubaka sector of Musambira commune, where parents were asked to bury their baby boys alive by former Interahamwe leader Mukangango. In some locations, Tutsis were able to defend themselves against the attacks that were coming to kill them. On Bibare Hill in Kayenzi commune, Tutsis who had taken refuge on the hill fought the attacks for 2 days. Later on, government soldiers from Gitarama joined forces with Kayenzi commune police and Interahamwe militia in a series of attacks on the Tutsis and killed them. In Ntongwe commune, Tutsis from Gisari sector and Chibanda fled to Nyiranduga Hill to fight the deadly attacks. They fought for 2 days and repelled the attacks. Burgomestre Kagabo later told the Tutsis who had been fighting that they should stop and instead negotiate their way to safety. He further told them that they should leave the hill and join other Tutsis who had taken refuge at Ntongwe commune to ensure their security. As soon as they arrived at the commune offices, they were attacked by Interahamwe militia, government soldiers, and communal police, who fired and threw grenades at them. The survivors were later evacuated from the commune and killed in Nyamukumba Valley as they tried to flee to Ruhango Sous-Prefecture. In the aftermath of the genocide, some communes in the former Gitarama prefecture, like Buringa, Nyakawanda, Nyabikenye, knew periods of insecurity caused by insurgents who were setting on fire some of the communal buildings, like the former Buringa commune, which was burned down in 1997. The first massacres of Tutsis who had taken refuge at Sainte Famille Church took place on April 15, 1994. At least 135 men and boys were killed. After the rescue of Tutsis who were hiding at the Centre National de Pastorale Saint-Paul by the RPF Inkotanyi, the killers expressed their anger to those who had taken refuge in Sainte Famille Church. On June 17, 1994, at around 10 a.m., a major attack went to Sainte Famille Church and killed nearly 100 Tutsi men and 2 girls. On June 15, 1994, UNAMIR evacuated some Tutsis to areas which were under the control of the RPF Inkotanyi. Women, girls and children were evacuated because Colonel Munyakazi Laurent had requested Councillor Nyirabagenzi Odette and Mukanduti Angelina to bring Interahamwe militia to surround the car where those to be evacuated were being loaded to make sure that no men or boys would be taken, as this would have made the RPF Inkotanyi stronger. At Sainte Famille Church, the killers would come at any time, choose and take some Tutsis to kill them, since the church was surrounded by the gendarmes and the Interahamwe militia on a daily basis, making it difficult for Tutsi refugees to even attempt to flee. On June 19, 1994, the killers, along with Colonel Munyakazi Laurent, Mukanduti Angelina, Nyirabagenzi Odette, Kamatamu Efrazi, Colonel Lenzao Tustsis, and Father Mnyeshaka, abducted about 17 other young men and killed them. They included Rubashangwaya Bonaventure, who worked in the Ministry of Finance and Economy, Minifineko, Munyesanga Jean-Marie Vianney, Athanase, Alois, Ignace, Kasongo, Alexandre, Jean Damascene, Safari, Jean-Pierre, and others whose identities were not known. This was revealed during the trial of Major General Munyakazi Laurent by the Military High Court on November 16, 2006. On June 20, 1994, for the third time, UNAMIR evacuated some Tutsis to the areas already occupied by the RPF Inkotanyi, but were unable to take them all. The killers, in complicity with Father Mnyeshaka Wenceslas, continued to take Tutsis one by one until the RPF Inkotanyi captured the city of Kigali and rescued those who had survived and were still at Sainte Famille. On June 26, 1994, Colonel Munyakazi Laurent, along with Mukanduti Angelina and other members of the militia, including Mugubiri, went to Sainte Famille and took away about 70 young men to kill them. On April 22, 1994, the attack on the Tutsi refugees at Sela, Centre des études de langue africaine, also went to Centre National de Pastorale Saint-Paul and killed 4 people, including Batsinduka Aristarque and Rukundo Damien. On June 14, 1994, at the Centre National de Pastorale Saint-Paul, a large attack came and took away between 72 and 80 Tutsis to the Rugenje sector, from where they were taken to be killed at the CND. The attack was composed of many Interahamwe, including Nyeshimana Jean-Pierre Elias Kivide, Fidel Castal, Furaha Elias Shitani, Mugubiri, the Councillor Nyirabagenzi Odette, Inspector Mukanduti Angelina, Colonel Laurent Munyakazi, Father Mnyeshaka Wenceslas, and others. Before they came back and took away those that they had killed on June 14, 1994, on June 13, 1994, Colonel Munyakazi Laurent, with Nyirabagenzi, Mukanduti, and Father Mnyeshaka, held a meeting with Tutsis who had taken refuge at St. Paul to ask them where they would want to go, either in the area controlled by the RPF Inkotanyi or that controlled by the so-called Abatabazi government. They compiled lists which are thought to have been used to kill them. On that day, the killers said that they would return on June 17, 1994, to eliminate all Tutsis who were present. The plot was not fulfilled because on the night of June 16 to 17, 1994, the RPF Inkotanyi forces liberated Tutsis who had sought refuge at the Centre National de Pastorale Saint-Paul and took them to safety. In order for the RPF Inkotanyi forces to liberate those who were at the Centre National de Pastorale Saint-Paul, they started firing heavily on the Abatabazi government forces on June 16, 1994. During the day until they arrived at the Centre National Pastorale de Saint-Paul at night. Some Tutsis who were there did not believe that the Inkotanyi had arrived, and while some were being evacuated that night, others stayed behind and were killed the next day on June 17, 1994. On June 15, 1994, After an attack that had taken away many Tutsis on the previous day, there was a Hutu young man named Gasore Gustave who had brought Tutsis to the Centre National Pastorale de Saint-Paul to hide them and remain there because he feared he would be killed, as the killers already knew that he had been taking Tutsis to safety. On this date, a group of people, including his parents and relatives, took him away from where Father Chizimana Celestin had hidden him in his house, and the priest begged them to let him go, but his parents said he was going to be questioned by the authorities. They took him and killed him at Sofergwa. Kamea André was the editor-in-chief of the opposition paper Rwanda Russia and was one of the founders of PL Party. Rwanda Russia was published twice a month, competing with other MRND-backed newspapers such as Kangura. Kamea was also the first to publish the photos of Inkotanyi, highlighting that there were Rwandan children who were returning home in a story headlined, Urwanda, Murundi. He was one of the most wanted people whom they claimed was working closely with the RPF Inkotanyi. Kamea and his wife Nyiramuruta Suzanne and their daughter Oliver were killed on orders from the former prefect of Kigali, Renzao Tustsis, and Colonel Mnyakazi Laurent. Kamea André was killed on the night of June 15th to 16th, 1994. On June 16th, 1994, Nyirabagenzi Odette and his accomplices went to Centre National de Pastorale de Saint-Paul to announce his death. On June 14th, 1994, he had spent the day with his son Kamea Olivier at Abizira Maria Sisters Convent. On the same day, the Interahamwe militia were patrolling around the Sainte Famille Church, the Centre National de Pastorale Saint-Paul, and around the area where Kinyamateka newspaper was sold. On the morning of June 15, 1994, Kamea André went to see Father Mnyeshaka Wenceslas for the latter to decide on helping him to flee because he was one of the most wanted. Instead, Father Mnyeshaka immediately took him to Nyirabagenzi Odette's place. Nyirabagenzi was the councillor of Rugenji sector, where the Interahamwe militia met. Nyirabagenzi had been looking for him. One of the Interahamwe who was present by the name of Ntambara is the one who indicated where his body was buried about 200 meters from Nyirabagenzi Odette's place. Thank you for listening to another episode of Kwibuka Podcast. As always, make sure you leave us a review, sharing what you like about the podcast, and share with others who would be interested in listening.